everyone, welcome back to N.O.A the Explorer. I am Dr. Akarano. I am an adult, child and adolescent psychiatrist, and today we will be discussing the Inpatient Psychiatry unit, also known as the Psych Ward, also known as the Behavioral Health Unit, and probably some other names that I'm not going to mention. Specifically today, we are going to be discussing the admissions and orientation process. I really wanted to start from before you get on the unit, what typically happens. So if that's interesting, keep watching. Before you get on the inpatient psychiatry unit, typically you are in an acute crisis, especially in the United States. In other countries, it's probably different. However, in the United States, it's typically an acute crisis stabilization unit where people with severe mental illness crisis are coming into the hospital for a potential inpatient psychiatric admission. Sometimes it can be voluntary, sometimes it can be involuntary. Voluntary is when you drive yourself to the hospital, you recognize that you're having a mental health crisis, and you come in. Now, involuntary is when, depending on the state that you're in, a family member can petition, a judge, a doctor, your therapist, police officers can petition as well. Really anyone that can petition to have you come to the hospital and to be evaluated by a mental health professional in the emergency room, in the crisis center, to see if you meet criteria for inpatient psychiatric admission. The laws are really different in every state about involuntary commitment, and I really can't go over every single possible state law regarding that. So that's something to ask about when you get to the hospital. If that's something you're concerned about, you should definitely ask. If you are coming to the hospital, it's okay to bring a friend or a significant other or someone who knows you well so that they can give you a history, because chances are, if you are in crisis, you possibly could not remember everything that you want to say. Sometimes it's helpful to bring a family member so they can talk to the medical staff on your behalf. A lot of times you go through the emergency room before getting admitted to the inpatient unit. However, there are some what we call standalone psychiatric hospitals where it's just a psychiatric hospital and that's all they do. In those type of facilities, you would just show up at the front door, reception area, be evaluated and admitted. Now, if you go to a hospital that has other units besides psychiatry units, you would go through the emergency room and then be admitted. Some hospitals, if they have a psychiatric emergency room, will put you there. Once they have medically cleared you, the emergency room doctors or practitioners need to first do a few basic blood work, maybe get your urine, ask you a few questions to make sure that you're not having a medical crisis on top of your psychiatric crisis. Because if you are having a medical crisis, then you need to have that taken care of first before the psychiatric crisis. We usually see this in terms of overdose attempts where people are coming in and you tell the emergency room staff members that you've tried to overdose. Then they will first of all make sure that medically you're fine before they admit you to the inpatient psychiatry unit. In that case, you go from the emergency room to the medical floors, finish your medical clearance, be taken care of by the internal medicine, hospitalist, ICU, whoever, any of those hospital staff members and practitioners. And then once they feel that you are medically cleared, then they will call psychiatry to transfer you to the inpatient unit. So sometimes I'll see people in the emergency room and I say, inpatient might not be the option right now. We could do intensive outpatient, partial hospitalization if that's an option. And, as a last resort, we could also do inpatient psychiatry, especially if you're telling me, oh, I want to come in because I'm having these active thoughts that if I go home, I will not be safe at home and something potentially imminently dangerous could happen. And I'm tiptoeing around the word because I don't want to get censored by YouTube, but, I am a medical professional and I like to use medical terminology. Basically, if you're having an active suicide crisis or active homicidal ideations, and what that means is you want to essentially hurt yourself or hurt other people imminently and to the point of death or dying, then we have to take that seriously. And other things as well. There are other things that are a psychiatric emergency that could potentially mean that you get to the inpatient psychiatry unit. unit. When you get to the emergency room, you may or may not always see a psychiatrist. When I was a resident, especially if it's a teaching hospital, yeah, you probably will see a psychiatrist in the emergency room. But if it's not a teaching hospital, if it's smaller hospital, community hospital, private hospitals, you'll have a member of the behavioral health staff. It could be a social worker, it could be a counselor, it could be a nurse practitioner, it could be a PA, do your initial intake or your intake assessment. They may or may not make the decision to admit you. Typically, they're talking to a psychiatrist, though. If the decision is to admit you to the inpatient psychiatry unit, at some point in that decision-making plan, somebody will be talking to the psychiatrist, which is the physician. Unfortunately, that means that you may have to tell your story multiple times, which we appreciate your patience with us. But sometimes when someone calls me with a potential admission to the inpatient psychiatry unit, I have to get the history from you, the patient, again, because not that I don't trust the other staff members or I don't trust the person I spoke with, but at the end of the day, you as a patient deserve to be heard, and I need to hear it from you. So sometimes you'll have to tell the receptionist why you came to the hospital. You tell the ER doctor why you came to the hospital. Then you tell the social worker why you came to the hospital. Then you tell the psychiatrist why you came to the hospital. And then the psychiatrist that saw you in the emergency room will be different from the psychiatrist that sees you on the inpatient unit. And then here you go saying the same thing again. And I do know it's a repetitive process, and then sometimes the paperwork can be repetitive, but please bear with us because these are things that we just kind of need to go through. And sometimes it helps because, the more you tell your story, the more you can actually remember things, right? Maybe in the emergency room, things are so chaotic and the crisis is so severe that you forget some things. But then by the time you come to the inpatient unit, or by the time you get transferred to the behavioral health side of things, you start to remember things. You're like, oh yeah, that actually happened, or this happened, or that happened. Telling the story multiple times can help with that. If this video was helpful to you and of interest to you, please go ahead and subscribe, and turn on your notifications so that when I make videos, you will be the first to know.